I came home from work on a Thursday evening, and my key didn't work. I stood there on the porch for a moment, telling myself it was a fluke. Maybe the lock was sticking. Maybe I was just tired after a 14-hour shift running operations across 4 hospital facilities. I tried the key again. Nothing. Then the door opened from the inside, and my husband Damian was standing there, blocking the doorway with his arms crossed, wearing the same smug expression he'd been wearing more and more over the last few months. "You're not welcome here anymore, Jasmine," he said. I looked past him into the living room. Kimberly was standing near the couch, one hand resting on a stomach that was unmistakably visibly pregnant. And behind her, arms crossed, wearing the same expression her son was wearing, stood Diane, my mother-in-law. I want to be honest with you about something right now, because it matters for everything that comes after. I already knew about Kimberly. I'd known for weeks. What I did not know, standing on that porch looking at her stomach, was that she was pregnant. That part landed like a blow to the chest. But I want you to understand, I am not a woman who lets a blow like that show on my face. Not to a man who was already enjoying every second of my reaction. "This is my house too," I said, my voice even. Damian laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from a man who thinks he's already won. "Your house? I pay this mortgage every single month, Jasmine. $4,000 out of my own account. A real provider. You've been so busy playing career woman, you never once had to worry about a roof over your head, because I handled that." Diane made a small, satisfied sound behind him. "A man who provides deserves a family who appreciates him," she said, something you never understood. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and called the one person who has never once let me down in my entire life. My sister picked up on the second ring. "Jasmine? Damian just locked me out of the house," I said, my voice calm, level, almost pleasant. "I need you to file an eviction notice tonight." There was a brief pause. Then, "Already on it. Are you safe?" "I'm safe," I said. "I'm leaving now." I hung up the phone, looked at my husband one final time, and turned to walk down the driveway without a single tear, without a single raised word. I hung up the phone, looked at my husband one last time, picked up one small bag, the only thing I actually needed, and turned to walk down the driveway. Behind me, Damian's voice followed me across the lawn. "You can call whoever you want, Jasmine," he shouted. "This is my house. I pay for it. You have no rights here." I kept walking. "You hear me?" he yelled. "I'll have your name removed from the lease by the end of the week. You're not coming back in here." Diane laughed behind him, loud and proud, like her son had just delivered the final word. "Let her go," she said. "She'll learn real quick who this house belongs to." I stopped beside my car and looked back at all 3 of them standing on my porch. Damian, smug. Diane, satisfied. Kimberly, silent with her hand resting on her stomach. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I knew something none of them did. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. He had no idea how wrong he was. And he had no idea that I had already been quietly preparing for this exact moment for weeks. Let me take you back, because you need to understand exactly how we got to that porch. I'm Jasmine. I'm 27, and I'm the director of operations for a large healthcare network, overseeing 4 facilities. I built that career from the ground up, starting as a floor coordinator at 22 and working my way up through sheer discipline and education. I met Damian around that same time at a mutual friend's engagement party. He worked as a senior loan processor at a regional bank, and he had that easy, room-filling confidence some men carry, the kind that feels like charm until you realize it's actually entitlement, wearing a nice suit. My father built a small but meaningful real estate portfolio before he passed away, and he left it the way any smart man protects a legacy. Inside an irrevocable trust, managed jointly by me and my sister, who became an attorney specifically so she could handle the legal side of what our father built. We never flaunted any of it. No big announcements, no bragging at family dinners. My father used to say that money talked loudest in silence, and greed only shows up once people start performing wealth instead of building it quietly. My sister and I took that lesson seriously. When Damian and I got married, I didn't want him walking into a house that felt like it belonged to my family. I wanted him to feel like an equal partner, not a guest in someone else's legacy. So my sister and I used the trust to purchase a beautiful home specifically for the two of us, and we set it up to look, on paper, exactly like a standard rental. Damian signed a lease with a property management company that handled maintenance and rent collection, a company that, unknown to him, was also owned by the same trust that held the mortgage. Every month, he wrote a check for $4,000, and that check went straight into an account that covered the actual mortgage payment, with the difference quietly building into our family's investment portfolio. He never knew any of that. He just knew he was the man of the house, and he loved that title more than almost anything else in his life. What Damian never seemed to notice, or maybe chose not to notice, was that I was covering just as much. My income went into my own account, but I transferred half of every bill into our joint account every single month. Half the electric, half the water, half the groceries, half of everything that kept our household running. Damian's paycheck went straight into that same joint account. On paper, we were equal partners. In his mind, and especially in his mother's mind, he was the sole provider, and I was simply along for the ride. I let him have that. I know how fragile a certain kind of man's ego can be, and for a long time, I thought giving him that pride was harmless. Then I found the receipt. It fell out of his jacket pocket while I was hanging it up one evening. A hotel charge, 20 minutes from our house, dated a night he told me he was working late on a closing. I confronted him with it laid flat on our kitchen counter. "What is this, Damian?" He looked at it for 1 second too long before he answered. "A closing dinner. Some of the loan officers stayed over instead of driving back that late." I looked at my husband and watched him lie to my face with an ease that told me this wasn't the first time. I didn't scream. I didn't demand his phone. I said one word, "Okay," and let him believe he talked his way out of it. But that night, something in me went quiet and cold and very, very focused. I started paying attention to things I'd never once thought to check. A missed call, a perfume that wasn't mine. And within a few weeks, I had confirmed what I already suspected in my gut. My husband was having an affair. I didn't confront him again. I am not the kind of woman who screams and cries and demands answers a man is only going to lie about anyway. I watched. I waited. Because Damian is, above almost everything else, predictable. Men who perform confidence for a living, the way he does at that bank every day, always eventually get too comfortable. They always eventually slip. I just didn't know, sitting quietly with that knowledge for weeks, that his slip would come with a pregnant woman standing in my living room and my key no longer turning in my own front door. When I left the house, I drove straight to a Hilton hotel. I do not even remember choosing it. I just remember pulling into the parking lot, walking through the lobby with one bag in my hand, and checking in with a calm face while my whole life sat in boxes on my porch. I was just getting settled when my phone rang. It was my sister. "Where are you?" she asked. "At a hotel," I said. "No," she said immediately. "Come stay with us, at least until the emergency hearing is settled and we get the house back." "I'm okay," I told her. "Thank you. I just need tonight." She was quiet for a second, and I knew she understood. I did not take her up on the offer that first night. I needed to be completely alone with what had just happened before I let anyone, even people who loved me, see my face. The next morning, when I opened my eyes, there was a text from my brother-in-law, Charles. It was a photo of the guest room at their house. Fully made up. Ready. Waiting. Underneath it, he wrote, "Don't you dare stay in that hotel one more night. If you're not here tonight, I'm coming to get you myself." For the first time since Damian locked me out, I smiled. I drove straight to my sister's law office instead of going home to that hotel room. "I want everything on him," I told her, sitting across from her desk in yesterday's clothes. "Before I go into work today, I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with." My sister studied me for a moment, the way she always does when she's deciding how hard to push. "Tonight, you're staying at my house. No more hotels. I mean it, Jasmine." I nodded, because I knew better than to argue with her when her voice took on that tone. Then I told her about something I hadn't mentioned yet, something I'd found weeks earlier that I hadn't fully understood at the time. I've spent my entire adult life around hospital finance and operations. I am not the kind of woman who mixes her money with anyone's, marriage or not. That structure was never about distrust. It was about being smart. But about a month before the lockout, I'd logged into that joint account to pay a utility bill and noticed something strange. A linked account I didn't recognize, opened under Damian's name alone, with deposits that didn't match anything on his normal pay schedule. There were purchases from a boutique 2 towns over, a deposit that came in as a lump sum, far larger than any bonus a senior loan processor would typically see. At the time, I'd assumed it might be connected to the affair. Money he was quietly pulling aside to spend on her. But sitting in my sister's office that morning, saying it out loud for the first time, I realized something that turned my stomach. "That deposit was too large," I said slowly. "That's not affair money. That's not what a man skims off his paycheck to buy a woman jewelry. That's real money, and I don't know where it came from." My sister leaned forward. "You think there's more going on than the affair." "I think," I said, "that whatever this is, it's bigger than a woman on the side. I need you to find out where that money came from, not just who she is. What else is he hiding?" My sister didn't hesitate. "I'm calling Marcus this morning." Marcus was a private investigator my sister's firm had used for years. Careful, thorough, a man who had never once missed a detail on any case he worked for us. She picked up her phone right there in front of me and made the call before I'd even finished my coffee. I went into work that day and ran 4 facilities on almost no sleep, smiling at meetings, approving budgets, handling a staffing crisis in the ER, all while carrying a secret that was about to blow my entire marriage wide open. What I didn't know yet was that Marcus was about to find something even larger than a hidden bank account. And what none of us knew yet was that the woman standing in my living room, rubbing her pregnant belly with such practiced innocence, was hiding something far worse than an affair. Marcus called my sister 3 days later, and what he'd found changed the entire direction of the investigation. The deposit in that hidden account, $180,000, had come from a cash-out refinance loan. A real loan, processed and funded through the very bank Damian worked for, listing him as having ownership interest in our home. I remember sitting in my sister's office, reading that loan file for the first time, and feeling something colder than anger settle into my chest. Because Damian knew exactly what a cash-out refinance was. He processed loans like it every single week for other clients. He knew renters don't build equity. He knew the difference between a mortgage and a lease better than almost anyone in that entire bank. He didn't do this out of confusion. He did it because he believed he deserved to be paid for the image he'd been performing. He wanted proof, in dollars, that playing the provider had purchased him something real. How did this even get approved? I asked my sister. He doesn't own that house. There's no deed in his name. There's no equity to borrow against. My sister slid another page across the desk, a signature at the bottom of the underwriting approval, Diane. His mother approved it, my sister said quietly. She skipped the title search, flagged the file as expedited for a long-term customer, pushed it past normal underwriting. I sat with that for a long moment, and something surprising happened. I didn't feel the urge to hate Diane in that moment the way I hated her son, because the more Marcus dug, the clearer a different picture became. Diane hadn't conspired with Damian to defraud anyone. Diane genuinely believed, the way she'd believed for 2 straight years, that her son owned that house. He had told her, over and over at every family dinner, at every holiday, that he paid the mortgage on his home, that it was his, that he was the man taking care of everything. She never once asked to see a deed, because why would a mother doubt her own son's word? She was a bank manager who had gotten comfortable, who had let 15 years of trust in her own judgment turn into carelessness, and who loved her son enough to sign off on something she should have verified first. That carelessness was still fraud. It was still a crime. But it wasn't cold-blooded scheming. It was a mother's blind spot, weaponized by a son who knew exactly how to use it. Damian, on the other hand, knew precisely what he was doing. $180,000 landed in his account, and within days, he was standing in a BMW dealership, leasing a brand new X5 for Kimberly, white exterior, tan leather, a bow on the hood. She posted a video of herself behind the wheel that same night, captioned, "God is setting me up for a beautiful life." I sat in the hospital break room on my lunch break, staring at that video on my phone, and felt something in me go very, very still, because that house was never his to borrow against, which meant every single dollar he was spending, every gift he was giving her, was built entirely on fraud. I could have picked up the phone that same afternoon and ended it. One call to bank compliance, and Damian and Diane would both be under investigation within the week. I didn't make that call. Not yet. Because 2 days later, Marcus sent over something that had nothing to do with the loan at all, and everything to do with the woman carrying my husband's supposed child. I hadn't originally asked Marcus to dig into Kimberly. I only wanted information on Damian, on the money, on whatever else he was hiding. But that changed on a Tuesday evening, when my sister called me with a strange edge in her voice. Marcus sent over some surveillance photos from following Damian's spending patterns, she said. One of them isn't Damian at all. She sent me the photo. Kimberly, standing outside an apartment complex I didn't recognize, laughing with a man who was very clearly not my husband, his hand resting comfortably on her lower back, the kind of familiar, easy touch that only comes from real intimacy, not a fling. Who is that? I asked. We don't know yet, but Marcus says he's been showing up in the background of her movements for months. Something in me shifted right then. Up until that moment, I'd only wanted to understand Damian's betrayal. Now I wanted to understand hers too. I want everything on her, I told my sister. Everything. It took Marcus another week and a half to build the full picture, and when he finally laid it out for me, I sat in stunned silence at my sister's kitchen table for a long time before I said a single word. The man's name was Elijah, a youth counselor at a community center, 26 years old, quiet and steady by every account Marcus could gather. He and Kimberly had been together for over a year. Real dates, real history, an apartment lease with both their names on it. And then came the part that made my stomach turn. Marcus had gotten hold of a medical record through a source at Kimberly's OB/GYN office, the kind of careful legal digging his license allowed for a fraud investigation of this scope. According to that record, Kimberly was 6 months pregnant. She had told Damian she was 4 months along. I sat with that math for a long time before it clicked into place completely. 4 months was exactly when Damian and Kimberly's affair had started getting serious. 6 months lined up perfectly with her relationship with Elijah. She wasn't confused about dates. She was lying deliberately to make Damian believe the baby was his, and planning, based on notes Marcus found referencing an early induction request to her doctor, to fake a premature birth when the timeline didn't add up on its own. I learned a long time ago that you do not shed a tear over people who show you exactly who they are underneath the mask. Kimberly had shown me hers. So had her father, the pastor who stood in his pulpit every Sunday, preaching about sin while apparently knowing exactly what his daughter was doing. I didn't cry that night at my sister's house. I sat at that kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee in front of me, and I started planning. "You're not calling the bank yet," my sister said. It was not a question. "Not yet," I said. "I want to talk to Elijah first." My sister leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long second. "Are you sure about that?" "No," I admitted, "but he deserves to know. If that baby is his, he deserves to hear it before the rest of them do." "And what if he doesn't believe you?" "Then I'll show him what Marcus found." My sister was quiet after that, the kind of quiet she gets when she disagrees with me, but understands exactly why I have already made up my mind. Finally, she nodded. "I'll have Marcus get everything we need first," she said. "Full name, work location, schedule, anything public and legal that confirms we're approaching the right person. We are not walking into this blind. I want to tell you what the next few weeks look like, because I think it matters that you understand just how reckless a man becomes when he believes he's finally gotten away with something. The BMW lease was only the beginning. Marcus kept building his file, and every few days my sister would call me with another entry to add to it. Damian moved Kimberly into a furnished 2-bedroom apartment across town, paying 6 months up front in cash. He opened 2 new credit cards in the weeks that followed, both approved almost instantly, both backed by a line of credit his mother had personally vouched for at the bank. He took out a separate personal loan on top of the fraudulent refinance. This one smaller, $12,000, used almost entirely to furnish a nursery in white and gold, the kind of nursery you photograph and post, not the kind you actually need. He wasn't hiding any of it. That was the part that stunned me most. A man committing real prosecutable bank fraud was posting pieces of it publicly through Kimberly's social media, tagging himself in photos standing next to furniture he had no legal right to be buying with money he had no legal right to have taken. "He's spending like there's no bottom to it," my sister said one evening, scrolling through screenshots Marcus had compiled. "Does he really think none of this is traceable?" "He thinks his mother's signature makes him untouchable," I said. "He spent his whole life believing that as long as someone with authority backs him, the rules don't actually apply to him." I sat with that thought for a long time, because in a strange way, watching him spend so recklessly wasn't painful anymore. It was almost peaceful. Every dollar he spent was another dollar of evidence. Every credit card he opened was another signature on a document that would eventually help bury him. My sister, ever the attorney, wanted to move faster than I did. "We have enough right now to report the loan," she told me one night. "Compliance would freeze his accounts within days." "Not yet," I said again, the same 2 words I'd been saying for weeks. "Jasmine, I need to understand your reasoning here. Every day we wait, he's committing more fraud, more debt, more exposure for all of us if this gets messier than it needs to be." I thought about it carefully before I answered her, because she deserved a real answer, not just my stubbornness. If we report it now, it becomes a clean, boring fraud case, I said. A man took out a loan he shouldn't have. His mother approved it carelessly. It gets investigated. Maybe he gets charged. Maybe he doesn't. And life moves on exactly the way men like him expect it to. I don't want boring. I want him standing in that house, in front of everyone he's performed for, when the truth comes out all at once. I want Diane standing there too. I want the pastor there. I need it to happen exactly the way I plan it, not the way a bank's compliance department happens to schedule an audit. My sister was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, the same slow, knowing smile she'd worn her entire life, whenever she watched me plan something down to the smallest detail. "You've got the patience of a surgeon," she said. "I learned it from watching people who don't have it," I said. "Rush decisions save nothing. They just make different messes." What none of us knew yet, sitting in her kitchen going over screenshots of a man's downfall in real time, was that Diane herself was beginning to feel the first small cracks of doubt about what she'd done. Doubt she was choosing, every single day, to bury instead of examine. I never witnessed this conversation myself. I only learned about it much later, through pieces Marcus gathered, and pieces Diane herself admitted once everything finally came apart. But I think it belongs in this story, because it explains something important about how ordinary people talk themselves into terrible decisions, one small justification at a time. About 3 weeks after the loan funded, a junior underwriter at Diane's branch flagged the file during a routine internal review. Nothing dramatic, just a note in a queue, the kind of thing that crosses a branch manager's desk a dozen times a week. The underwriter noted that the property listed as collateral didn't match standard ownership records in the county system and asked whether Diane wanted it escalated for a full title verification. Diane sat with that flag for 11 minutes before she dismissed it herself, marking it resolved, citing her own prior approval as sufficient documentation. I imagine, though I'll never know for certain, that some part of her understood exactly what she was doing in that moment. Because a bank manager with 15 years of experience does not accidentally dismiss a title discrepancy flag. She chooses to. She tells herself a story that makes the choice feel smaller than it is. My son told me it's his house. My son wouldn't lie to me. I've watched him pay that mortgage for 2 years with my own eyes on the statements. What she never let herself ask, according to what she admitted much later, was the one question that would have unraveled everything in an instant. If it's really his house, why has the deed never once had his name on it? She buried that question the same way she buried the flag, and every week that followed, she made the exact same choice again, a little more easily each time, the way people always do once the first lie has already been told. I share this part, not because I feel sympathy for what Diane did. I don't. But I think it matters for you to understand that fraud like this rarely starts with a villain twirling a mustache. It starts with a mother who loves her son more than she trusts her own training, choosing comfort over verification, one small flag at a time, until the comfort becomes a crime she can no longer walk back. I met Elijah at a quiet coffee shop near the community center where he worked, 2 weeks before everything came to a head. I watched him walk in, cautious, guarded, clearly uneasy about meeting a stranger who'd reached out asking to discuss something personal and important about someone he cared about. He sat down across from me, arms crossed. "I don't know you," he said. "What's this about?" I didn't waste his time. "My name is Jasmine. My husband has been having an affair with a woman named Kimberly for the last several months." His face didn't change much at first. "Okay, I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't see what that has to do with me." "Because I believe you know her too," I said gently. "I believe you've known her for over a year." He went very still. "That's not. Kimberly and I have been together a long time. I don't know what you think you know, But she's pregnant, Elijah, I said. 6 months, according to her own medical records. She's told my husband she's 4 months along. I watched a grown man's face move through disbelief, confusion, and something raw and wounded underneath both. That's not possible, he said, his voice quieter now. She never told me she was. We haven't even talked about kids. She would have told me. Would she have? I asked. Has she been around less lately? Canceling plans? Sick more often than usual, with excuses that never quite added up? He didn't answer right away, and I watched something shift behind his eyes as the pieces he'd been ignoring for weeks finally clicked into place. She told me she'd been busy with her father's church, he said slowly, almost to himself. She said her dad needed help with some new outreach program. I thought that's just what it was. I slid my phone across the table, the photos Marcus had gathered laid out one after another. He went through everyone in silence. When he finally set the phone down, his hands were shaking. I called her 3 days ago, he said quietly. She told me she had the flu. I offered to bring her soup. She said no. Her mom was already taking care of her. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Her mom's been dead for 6 years. What do you need from me? He finally asked. I need you to come to a house this coming Sunday, I said, but I need something from you between now and then, and it matters more than anything else I'm about to ask. You cannot say a word to Kimberly, not one word, not a hint, not a change in how you treat her, not a single missed call you decide to finally return out of anger. She cannot know that you know anything until the moment I bring you out in front of everyone. He frowned. Why does that matter so much? Because if she suspects for even a second, she'll change her story before Sunday. She'll find a way to explain it, or disappear, or turn it around on you before the truth ever gets spoken out loud in front of the people who need to hear it. I need her standing in that room Sunday still believing she's completely safe. That's the only way this works. He was quiet for a long moment. So I just keep acting normal. Answer if she calls. Act like nothing's changed. Exactly that, I said. I know how hard that's going to be, knowing what you know now. But we confront this together, Sunday, all at once. Not before. He nodded slowly, jaw tight. I can do that. She's had a year of lying to my face. I can manage a week of the same. I'll text you the address and the time, I said. Come an hour early. You'll wait out of sight until I bring you out. I'll be there, he said, whatever time you need me. In the 2 weeks leading up to that Sunday, my sister filed the formal eviction, and Damian treated the entire process like a joke. A process server caught up with him in the parking lot of his own bank, and according to 2 coworkers who witnessed it, Damian laughed out loud while reading the notice, right there in front of them, before folding it in half and shoving it into his jacket pocket like a parking ticket he had no intention of paying. Some paperwork isn't going to move a man out of a house he paid for, he reportedly told a coworker later that afternoon, loud enough for half the branch to hear him. My wife thinks she can scare me with a lawyer. I processed loans before that woman even had a real job. He told his friends he was about to finally get rid of the dead weight and move his real family in properly. He mentioned it at a barber shop, at a Sunday dinner, at his own mother's kitchen table, each time a little louder, a little more certain, a little more pleased with himself. He didn't check the court date on the notice. He didn't call an attorney of his own. He simply assumed, the way he'd assumed almost everything else in his life, that things would continue to work out in his favor because they always had before. What he never once considered was that the eviction order I'd filed wasn't actually about kicking him out of a house he already legally couldn't claim to own. It was a formality, a piece of paper to make the transition clean and undeniable if it ever came to that. The house had never needed a judge's permission to be reclaimed. It only needed me to decide the moment had come. And I had already decided the moment would be that Sunday. I arrived at the house that Sunday morning within minutes of watching Damian's car pull out of the driveway, headed to church with Kimberly and Diane in the back seat. A security company I'd hired arrived at almost the exact same time. 2 technicians replacing every lock on the property, while a third installed cameras at each entrance and along the driveway. While they worked, my sister, her husband, and his 2 brothers helped me carefully pack up every last piece of Damian's, Kimberly's, and Diane's belongings and carry them out to the garage. Nothing thrown, nothing scattered. I wasn't interested in becoming the version of cruelty they'd shown me. Elijah arrived about an hour before they were expected home, dressed simply, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. I walked him through exactly where he'd wait. In the kitchen, out of sight, alongside my sister and the rest of my family, close enough to hear everything. Remember, I told him, not a sound until I come get you. Whatever they say out there, whatever ugly thing gets thrown around, you stay put. I keep thinking about what I'm going to say to her, he admitted, and every version ends the same way. There's nothing left to say to someone who lied to you for a year. You don't owe her a speech, I said. You only owe yourself the truth, spoken out loud one time. At a little past 1 in the afternoon, I heard car doors outside, voices, laughter. Damian's voice, loud and confident. The same voice he'd used on that porch weeks earlier when he told me I wasn't welcome anymore. I didn't open the door for them. I walked calmly to the love seat near the front window, sat down, crossed my legs, and leaned back, arranging myself the way I would before walking into any high-stakes meeting at the hospital. My sister, her husband, and his brothers slipped quietly into the kitchen with Elijah. The new cameras above the entryway blinked their small, steady red lights, already recording. I let them walk in on their own. The door swung open, unlocked, exactly the way it had been left. Damian walked in first, still mid-laugh at something Kimberly had said, with Diane and Kimberly close behind him. His laugh died the instant he saw me sitting in his living room. "What is this?" he said, his voice sharp, already climbing toward outrage. "Jasmine, you need to leave. You're trespassing on my property." "Your property," I repeated, letting the words sit in the air. Diane stepped forward, chin lifted. "You heard him? Get out before we call the police." Kimberly, I noticed, didn't flinch the way I'd expected. She stepped further into the room instead, one hand resting on her belly, and looked me over with something close to amusement. "Damian told me you might try something like this," she said, a small satisfied smile pulling at her mouth. "Sitting there like you actually belong here. It's kind of sad, honestly. You should have just let him go quietly. You should sit down before you embarrass yourself further," Diane added. I stayed exactly where I was. I didn't raise my voice. I let my hands rest loosely in my lap and looked at all 3 of them in turn, unhurried. "I'm not trespassing," I said. "My name has been on this lease as an active tenant this entire time. To remove a tenant from a lease, you need a court order and a formal notice. I haven't been served either of those things, which means legally I still live here." I let that sit for a moment before I continued. "What you 3 should actually be worried about is that you're the ones in breach of the lease agreement. Moving an unauthorized third party into this home without written approval from the property management company. Changing the locks on a leased property without that same approval. Those are both direct violations." Damian's face twisted. "You don't get to lecture me about a lease on a house I've been paying for 2 years. "Read your agreement sometime," I said calmly. "Certain violations carry an immediate eviction clause. No 30-day notice required. You triggered it the day you locked me out." For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Damian's composure cracked entirely. "You think a piece of paper is going to save you?" he snapped, stepping closer, his voice rising. "I've worked in loans for 6 years, Jasmine. I know exactly how contracts work. You're bluffing." "I'm not bluffing," I said, my voice never rising to meet his. "But feel free to keep talking. I'm in no rush." What none of them understood, standing there shouting over each other in the middle of that living room, was that every word was being recorded. Diane came at me next, her voice climbing into something close to hysteria. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. I've spent 15 years at that bank. One phone call from me, and you'll never work in this county again." "Is that a threat?" I asked, still perfectly calm, still sitting exactly where I'd been sitting since they walked through the door. "Take it however you want," she snapped. Damian jumped back in, pacing now, his voice loud enough to rattle the windows. "This is my house. I paid $4,000 a month into that mortgage for 2 years, and now you want to stand here and tell me I don't own it? I refinanced this house. I took out a loan against my own equity. That money is mine." I said nothing. I let him keep going, because every sentence out of his mouth was another nail he was hammering into his own coffin, and he had no idea a camera above his head was capturing every single word of it. Kimberly, emboldened by the chaos, folded her arms and looked at me with open contempt. "You really thought you could just show up here and scare us out? This is going to be my house soon enough. My baby is going to grow up in this house, and there's nothing you can do about it. Get used to that." I let her words settle in the room, watching her enjoy the sound of her own arrogance, watching Damian nod along beside her like a man agreeing to his own downfall. "You're very confident for a woman standing in a house that was never Damian's to give you," I said quietly. "He owns this house," Diane snapped again. "I approved that loan myself. I saw the file. I know what I'm talking about." That admission, spoken in anger, in front of a running camera, was worth more to me than almost anything else that had happened in this entire ordeal. I stayed seated, calm, patient, and let the three of them keep talking, keep threatening, keep confirming, piece by piece, exactly what I needed them to say out loud. There was one more piece I hadn't planned on revealing that day. Not yet. I'd been holding it back like a blade tucked neatly beneath a silk sleeve, waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the moment Kimberly forgot who she was standing in front of. And because arrogance has never known how to keep quiet, she handed it to me herself. For most of the conversation, Kimberly had been leaning against the edge of the counter with her arms folded, letting Diane and Damian do the heavy lifting. She watched them defend themselves, watched them lie, watched them scramble. Every now and then, she would smirk like this was entertainment, like my pain was a show she had purchased front row tickets to. But the second Damian started looking shaken, the second Diane's voice cracked under the weight of what I had already exposed, Kimberly stepped forward. "Oh, please," she said, laughing under her breath. "This is pathetic." Damian turned toward her. "Kimberly, no, I'm serious." She looked me up and down like I was something wrinkled she'd found in the back of a closet. "You really did all of this because you can't accept that he left you." The room went still. I tilted my head. "Is that what you think this is?" "That's exactly what this is," Kimberly said, gaining confidence now that she had everyone's attention. "You're jealous, humiliated, bitter. He moved on, Jasmine. With me. We're having a baby. We're building a life. And you can dress this up in bank statements and investigator reports all you want, but at the end of the day, you're mad because he chose me." Diane gave a small, satisfied hum, like Kimberly had finally said what she had been too polished to say herself. Damian didn't say anything. That silence told me more than any confession could have. I looked at Kimberly and smiled faintly. You think Damian chose you? Her eyes flashed. I know he did. No, I said softly. You positioned yourself where you knew he was weak. Her smile thinned. I took one step closer. You studied him. You flattered him. You made him feel powerful when you knew he wasn't. You made him feel like leaving his wife was proof he was finally in control of his life. Kimberly scoffed, but her jaw tightened. You don't know anything about us. I know enough. You know what? She snapped, her voice rising. Maybe if you had made him feel like a man, he wouldn't have needed to come to me. Diane's eyebrows lifted. Damian's face hardened, but Kimberly didn't stop. She was too deep in it now, too intoxicated by the sound of her own cruelty. He wanted someone who believed in him, Kimberly continued, someone who didn't treat him like some child who needed permission to breathe. He wanted a family, a future, a woman who could give him something besides lectures and judgment. I nodded slowly, letting her think she was cutting me, letting her think she was winning. So the money was part of that future? I asked. Kimberly blinked. What? The money Damian took from his mother, I said. Was that part of the life you two were building? Damian looked at me, then at Kimberly. Kimberly recovered quickly. That was between Damian and his mother. Was it? Yes, she said sharply. He's grown. He made his own decisions. I gave a quiet laugh. That's interesting. Her eyes narrowed. What's interesting? That you want to call him grown now. Damian's expression shifted. Kimberly rolled her eyes. Don't twist my words. I'm not twisting anything, I said. I'm just trying to understand. Because according to you, Damian is this strong, decisive man who chose you, chose this baby, chose this new life. He did. But when the conversation turns to fraud, I said, suddenly it was all his decision, all his paperwork, all his responsibility. Kimberly's lips parted. I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. So which is it? Is he the man who chose you? Or the man you had to coach? The silence hit like a door slamming shut. Damian stared at Kimberly. Coach me? Kimberly laughed, but it came out too thin. She's playing games with you. No, I said. I'm asking a question. Kimberly pointed at me. You don't get to stand here acting like some victim when you were the one holding him back. He needed that money. We needed that money. Damian's brow pulled together. We? Kimberly froze for half a second. I caught it. So did he. I said nothing. Kimberly rushed on, trying to cover herself. I mean, for the baby, for stability, for a real future. You wouldn't understand that because all you ever cared about was controlling him. Kimberly, Damian said slowly, what did you mean by, we needed that money? She turned on him. Don't start acting brand new now. His voice dropped. Answer me. Her face flushed. You came to me scared, Damian, lost. You didn't know what to do. I helped you. You helped me how? Kimberly's eyes darted toward Diane, but Diane had gone quiet now. Real quiet. I folded my arms. Go ahead, Kimberly. Tell him how you helped. She looked back at me with hatred in her eyes. You think you're so smart. No, I said. I think you are exactly arrogant enough to tell the truth if someone bruises your pride. That did it. Kimberly's face twisted. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I told him what to say, because he was panicking and useless and scared his mother would ask too many questions. Damian went completely still. Kimberly didn't notice. She was too busy trying to wound me. I told him to ask Diane like it was temporary, she said, words spilling faster now. I told him not to mention me. I told him to make it sound like he needed help getting back on his feet, because mothers love feeling needed. That's not a crime. That's strategy. Diane's mouth fell open. Damian looked like somebody had reached inside his chest and pulled something loose. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Kimberly finally heard herself. Her smile disappeared. I kept my eyes on her. "Keep going." "No," she said quickly. "No, that's not—" "You told him exactly what to ask for," I said. "Exactly how to phrase it. Exactly how to make sure Diane didn't ask too many questions." Kimberly swallowed. Damian turned fully toward her now. "You told me that was my idea." She shook her head. "You're twisting this." "I remember," he said, voice low. "You said if I loved you, I'd stop letting my family treat me like a failure. You said I needed to prove I could provide." Kimberly's eyes filled with panic, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat gracefully. "And you did need to prove it," she snapped, "because I wasn't about to bring a baby into this world with nothing. I wasn't about to end up broke and unmarried while you sat around crying over your wife and waiting for your mother to rescue you." The room went ice cold. There it was, the truth, ugly and bare, standing in the middle of the kitchen with nowhere to hide. I reached into the folder on the island and pulled out the printed pages Marcus had given me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I know about the messages, Kimberly." Her face drained. I held up the papers. "The ones where you researched cash-out refinances months before Damian ever asked Diane for a dime. The ones where you told your friend in real estate you needed to secure your future before the baby came. The ones where you said it would be easy to convince a man to ask his mother for money if you framed it the right way." Damian took a step back from her. Diane whispered, "Kimberly." Kimberly's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time since she walked into my house, she had no performance left. I looked at Damian. "You thought you were making choices, but even your betrayal had a script." His eyes moved from the papers to Kimberly's face, and in that moment, I watched the last piece of his pride collapse. Not because he had hurt me, not because he had lied, not because he had stolen from his own mother, but because he finally understood that the woman he ruined his life for had played him like a man with a price tag. Kimberly still had no idea what was waiting for her just out of sight, in the kitchen behind them. I let the silence stretch for a moment, before I spoke again. "I think it's time all of you understood exactly what you're standing in," I said. "This house was never his. It never will be. And before we finish talking about the loan, there's someone here who needs to say a few things first." I turned toward the kitchen doorway. Elijah stepped out. Kimberly's face drained of every ounce of color. She took a small, involuntary step backward, her hand slipping off her belly entirely, and began edging toward the front door, only to find her path blocked. Damian, still reeling from what he'd just learned, looked between Elijah and Kimberly in complete confusion. "Who is this?" "Let me introduce you to Elijah," I said. "Kimberly's boyfriend. Has been, for over a year. And that baby she's carrying, the one you spent the last several months believing was yours, is his." "That's not true," Damian said, but his voice had already lost its certainty. Elijah stepped further into the room, his voice steady, despite the visible tremor in his hands. "It's true. We've been together over a year. I didn't know about the baby until 2 weeks ago." He turned to Kimberly, his jaw tight. "You told me your mother was taking care of you when you were sick. Your mother's been dead for 6 years, Kimberly." Kimberly broke down completely, sobbing into her hands, every ounce of her earlier arrogance gone. "I'm not claiming that child," Elijah continued. "Not until I get a DNA test done myself. Your word doesn't mean anything to me anymore." Damian turned to Kimberly, his whole body shaking. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do any of this to me?" She had no answer. She just cried harder, sinking onto the arm of the couch. My sister's husband stepped forward and handed Damian a thick envelope. "What is this?" Damian asked, his hands shaking. "Divorce papers," I said. "And you should also know I've already filed a fraud report on the loan you took out against a house you never owned. $180,000, Damian. 2 credit cards, a personal loan. All of it built on a claim of ownership that never existed for a single day of our marriage. And now I have every word you both just said, on camera, admitting exactly how it happened." Diane's face went white. "You recorded us?" "The moment you walked through that door," I said. "There was a flag on that loan file weeks ago, Diane. A junior underwriter caught the ownership discrepancy and asked you to escalate it. You dismissed it yourself. I have that documentation, too." "This is his house," Diane tried weakly. "He's paid every month." "He paid rent," I said. "And now the both of you are going to need very good attorneys." Elijah walked over to me quietly. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me the truth." "You deserve to know," I said. He looked once more at Kimberly, still sobbing, and walked out the front door without another word. The days that followed that Sunday moved quickly. The way things tend to, once the truth is finally out in the open, instead of buried under lies everyone had agreed to believe. Pastor Reginald's congregation learned the full story within a week, the way these things always traveled through a church community faster than any official announcement could. He stepped down from his pulpit less than a month later, citing a season of reflection, though everyone who mattered understood exactly what that meant. Kimberly moved out of state to stay with an aunt before the baby came, away from a congregation that no longer looked at her the way it once had. The fraud investigation moved the way these things typically do, slowly, but with the exact documentation and footage I had already handed over sitting at the center of it. Diane was placed on administrative leave within 2 weeks, then terminated once the internal audit confirmed everything my complaint had already laid out. The recording of her admitting she'd personally approved the file, paired with the buried underwriting flag, left very little room for her attorney to argue otherwise. Damian, once the full scope of the personal loans and credit cards came to light, found himself facing exactly the kind of consequences a man who processes loans for a living should have understood better than almost anyone. And Kimberly's own text messages, the ones planning out how to coach him through the fraud from the very beginning, meant she wasn't walking away from any of it either. I didn't feel joy watching it unfold. I felt something closer to relief, the settled feeling of finally setting down a weight I'd carried for months. I moved back into that house 2 weeks after that Sunday. It took me some time to feel ready, and I gave myself that time without guilt. I refurnished nearly every room and slowly turned it back into something that felt like mine again, not because a man had paid for it, but because I had built it, protected it, and fought to keep it exactly where it belonged. I went back to work the following week and threw myself into it the way I always have. Within the year, I was promoted again, overseeing an even larger portion of the hospital network's operations than before. A year after that Sunday, my brother-in-law introduced me to someone at a family gathering, a calm, steady man who never once made me feel like I owed him an explanation for my past. We took things slow, no rush, no performance, no need to prove anything to anyone. If there's one thing I want you to take from everything I've shared with you today, it's this. Pay attention to the people who need an audience to feel powerful. Pay attention to the ones who mistake a rent check for ownership, a title for love, a lie repeated often enough for the truth. And never be afraid to hold quietly onto what's actually yours, even while everyone around you is loudly claiming it belongs to them. They say the best revenge is living well. I think the better revenge is simply refusing to hand someone the deed to a life you built with your own hands. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And I want to hear from you honestly. Do you think Jasmine handled this the right way? What would you have done if this happened to you? Drop your thoughts below.